Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Think Bunker. If this is your first time viewing this video or just viewing this channel in general, thank you for watching. If you don't particularly like the more monotone kind of in-depth analysis of content, we have other types of content. In fact, we have a bigger project coming up soon. We start filming Friday. Well, if all goes well, then we also do, and it's a variety. It's War Thunder shorts basically. We reenact stuff or just create educational content via War Thunder on military technology. That's what this channel is about. We create military topics and discuss them, or rather discuss and debate military topics. This is what this series, or rather the bunker briefs, this type of video is supposed to be. But I'll get into that in a moment. If you're a returning viewer, even if you're my family, thank you for watching this content. We greatly appreciate it over here. Now, on to the actual video. But before I begin, I will, if you're observant and if you've watched this series for a while, you'll understand that I'm alone. And that's for a myriad of different reasons. Though, if you've noticed, in the background image, we've gone from 4 chairs around the table to 3. My co host Kento, or rather former co host, has left. I won't really get into exactly why that's his business, and that just sounds like a personal issue, to be honest with you. If you want me to, I will divulge it, but right now, that's not important. What I do know, what you do need to know, is that Kento has fled the bunker. The door's still open for him if he wants to come back, but he has disassociated himself with us. Now, with that out of, and then also that which leads Angered Sideburns to be my co-host. He wanted to be here for this recording, but was unable to for one specific reason. He's a hunter, and he recently and tonight shot a buck, an 8-point buck in the woods. Like that's great on him. And he said, "Listen, man, I'm sorry I can't make it." I said, "No, that's fine, dude. You shot an 8-point buck. Have at it, dude. That's something to be proud of." He's gonna go as far as the European mount, which is where instead of the traditional, or you say I say traditional, where you have the taxidermied head on a wall, it's more where you actually have one in my room of a 4-point buck, uh, where it's you skin the head, you don't have the neck on it, and it's just the skull and antlers mounted on your wall. Yeah, he's doing pretty good right now. He's looking a bit thin though. Anyways, and then C4 is a basically an unknown factor. I don't mean that offensively. I mean like, that literally because his work schedule is very hectic. But I've just heard from him this morning that I've heard from him that he's going to be having more time for just in general from his work. His work schedule is going to be lightening up a little bit soon, and that's going to be great for us, great for his personal life and school and all that stuff. So that's great. That's great. So with all that said, let's move into our topic of discussion: the Renault FT17. The various names you see below it are uh, rather different names is received over the years. FT stands for French Tank 17 because the I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, Kento would be the one to tell you about this stuff. I don't exactly have that information right now, but the FT-17 name comes from the Americans who named the American tank, which I'll get into in a moment, the M1917, and the French tank, the FT-17, for designated between the two. So, now, if you've known tank lore, you know what this tank is. But if you don't, or maybe that if you do know the vehicle, but you kind of want to get a idea of how this thing started and it's just kind of its overview of its service life, stick around. Now, before we talk about the vehicle, we have to talk about the problem that created said vehicle. And I'm going to point out everything on here is the problem that the FT had to solve, or rather, that created the FT. You have two machine guns, one on the Lewis gun on the right, and the left. I forget what machine gun. That's not a Bren gun. At least I don't think this is. This slide was created by Kento, so it's gonna be tough to tell. Uh, but it's a mobile machine gun. The reason I put these here was, oh wait, no, hold on. I put these machine guns here. The point I was trying to make with this was to acknowledge the fact that if you going back to tank lore, that the tank came about because that simple meme of machine gun kill people, but people kill machine gun. So put machine gun in box, but now machine gun no go get other people to go kill. So put tanks in large metal box to roll across battlefield and go get people. That's not how the tank came about, actually. Uh, Dadgummit. I sound like that, I sound like, actually, no. But that's actually not how the tank came about. The way the tank came about was because it was less of a mobile gun platform. It helped to be armed, yes, but it was actually just about creating a mobile piece of cover for your infantry. That's one of the reasons why the Mark 1 was so large. There's another reason, I'll get into that in a minute. So the issue wasn't the fact that you had mobile machine guns, or you didn't have mobile firearms. No, the issue was that you couldn't get the firearms across the trenches without the people carrying them dying, which if you know anything about people who, if they take a 7 millimeter bullet to the chest, very squishy, not good. Uh, with that said, the militaries wanted to create a method of making cover so that your friendly forces can get across no man's land without being shot to pieces. The solution, they thought, was armored cars, but this didn't work because armored cars were just blatantly awful for this terrain. Automotive technology at the time wasn't great at all. Compound this with the issue that you put a bunch of, I mean, even for just regular cars, and then you just put a bunch of armor on them. Now you have a much less power efficient engine, an over weighted engine, overstressed. That's a better word. Couple that with its insanely high ground pressure. Cars are better on paved roads. Armored cars, like especially during the Second World War, a lot of armored cars were made specifically to be used as reconnaissance forces or garrison forces in cities because they had paved roads. Now, anything's ideal terrain is a paved road, but I'm going to get into that in a minute. But armored cars suffer from what's called ground pressure. They have thin wheels and only 4 points of contact on a surface. This increases ground pressure, which means it's easier for them to cut into the ground. Now, how does ground pressure come into play? Well, if you know anything about physics, you'll think that you'll sink into the ground often, or you'll sink into mud. If you think it's the ground, you're correct. The mud is a different story. There's really four types of terrains. I've gone over this before in the military communications video, so please go watch that. Insert joke about shameless self promotion. But with that said, the there's four types of terrain you really can go over before that you can move an army through. The first is hard, flat pavement. I said it before, very easy, very perfect, ideal environment because there's so little say not factors, factors, but there's so little negative factors influencing the vehicles or just your troops' movements. The second being hard packed road. It's packed in dirt and kind of above the ground level. That, although not pavement, is still reinforced, so it's better, but not the best. Then you have soft ground. That's a grassy field. So there's a lot of air movement because of the worms that go through there and the moles and so on and so forth. So structurally, the ground is not as reinforced. This is where you get into the issue of ground pressure, where your vehicle sinks into this. This could be done because of heavy weight, too thin of a track, so on and so forth. Then you have mud. You're not going through mud. You can, but it's very difficult to. The best way to navigate mud to navigate your army through mud. Step one: don't go around it because it's such a pain to go through. Nothing likes mud. But then you also had shrapnel because you couldn't carry. And then you had another issue of shrapnel and bombs and artillery by extension. Shrapnel. I know the bottom picture is an airburst round. They didn't have those, not of my knowledge. But still the same shrapnel. The French did employ these handheld ballistic shields, these very thick metal shields, but they didn't really didn't do much. And then you also had the issue again of no man's land in between two large lines of people just staring at each other with rifles. So the solution was the tank, and a lot of people thought it was the Mark 1 that's at the top there, the top middle. But the Mark 1 had its own various amounts of issues. For example, it took 5 people to drive the thing. You had the driver in the front, and then in the back near the transmission, you actually had, near the engine, you had 2 transmissions. 2 people per transmission, if I'm not mistaken. If they needed to go right, the driver would turn around and yell at either the commander or the driver or the transmission operators themselves, and would say, it was mainly diverting power from the engine to the track, and which track got more power to the. It was this really whole big technical issue that 5 people needed to operate. Now, try to coordinate between 5 people while you're sitting next to an engine. And oh, by the way, you're being shot at and artilleried and bombed. That was another issue. The Mark 1s were incredibly slow, immaneuverable, and they were massive targets. So there's the issue with the Mark 1. This design, that problem, this vehicle solved pretty much all of these issues, or rather, was a solution to a lot of these issues. Beginning service in March of 1918 was the Renault FT-17, created in 1917 and adopted by both the U.S. military and the French military in 1917, though it didn't see combat service until March of 1918 for various reasons. Legally speaking, this tank should not exist. I'll get into that in a moment. Now, you'll see two designs on the bottom screen there. You'll have, these are the male and female versions. The male version has a bigger cannon because insert joke about big gun for big man. Then there is the female variant, which has a machine gun. Because as we all know, underneath the skirt of a Hotchkiss of a female is a Hotchkiss machine gun ready to spray bukkake of lead all over the faces of her opponents. I would assume so, but I don't know. Anyways, but there's one thing you'll notice about this. It has a turret, which I know for a tank this sounds, well, yeah, of course it has a turret. No. This has a turret. This is the first tank to do this. This means that it could, instead of, unlike the Mark 1, instead of having, instead of needing 3 guns to cover all angles of forward, i.e., one dead in the middle, one to the side, and one to the other side, you just had 1 gun. That cut down the amount of crew you needed. Furthermore, the driver of the vehicle that sat in the front and the commander right behind him with a closed compartment to the engine and the transmission. There's a wall separating the crew from the engine and the transmission. The transmission was right behind the crew compartment, and through some various amounts of gears went to the drive wheel and that big wheel in the back that drove the vehicle forward, and then behind that was the engine. You could control the vehicle with just 2 tillers, a brake, and a gear shifter. That all was connected to the engine and the transmission, which I know sounds basic, but somehow the Mark 1 didn't have this, even though cars existed. And then the FT simplified that process. You don't need multiple guns to cover multiple approaches. You just had 1 gun to do that because the turret revolved. Now, it's not a traditional turret in, say, a Abrams or a Bradley where the gun's fixed to the turret. If anything, the turret acts as a mobile sponson. The sponson is the thing that the guns in the British Mark 1 tanks sat in. Going back for a second, that top image on the middle where that gun is mounted, yeah, that's called a sponson or a gun mount. See, the turret did the exact same thing as that sponson, where it could turn, but the gun moved independent of the gun moved independent of the turret. So essentially, you would generally aim the gun with the turret, and then you would make a fine tune with your shoulder. But we'll get into that in a moment. This design was revolutionary. If you think of the format, crew in the front and engine and mobility in the back, that was what would create, from here on, would create the different classes of tanks, such as light, mediums, heavies, that era of tanks, into, so for example, like the Panzer 4 and 3, the Panzer 1, the Panzer 2, into the, then you had tank destroyers, then you had the Tiger 1, the heavy, and then you had the, using Germany as an example, of course, because they hit every mark, and assault guns such as the Sturmgeschütz. Then you had moving on from that, you had the universal tank concept, which although did keep tank destroyers in mind, really didn't need them. Only needed them when something really big happened, but even then could still dispose of the threat fairly quickly and efficiently. So things like your M4 Sherman as universal tanks. I believe it was the, not Centurion. That's later. I think the Challenger, the Panther. Tanks the M26 Pershing. Tanks designed to really just fill all the gaps and no longer require specialized other combat vehicles to fight with it. And meant to replace the vehicle, that era of tanks before it that required multiple groups of vehicles or multiple medium tanks to fulfill different roles in this same combat environment. The universal tank just simplified all of it, unified it. The MBT, the first era of MBTs was the Centurion and the M46 Patton in Korea that amplified the versatility of the medium tank. And then we get to modern medium tanks with the M1 Abrams in the 80s. Where they're truly independent at this point. Going back to the FT. The FT set a standard. Some people have called it the first modern. I disagree. I would say, though, this tank is a groundbreaker. Absolutely. Another thing I'd like to point out is if you look at the tracks of the FT, they're a bit wider than they really need to be, because this tank is relatively light. It could float on soft ground very easily with thinner tracks. Well, it's so the infantry can hide behind the vehicle. It gives it more surface space, if you will. Yes. So, moving on to the weaponry, you have up top basically an 8 millimeter machine gun put in a sponson mount, fired with your shoulder. Same thing with the 30. I believe it's either 35 or 37 millimeter cannon that was equipped in the turret, so on and so forth. Um, that's really all I have to say on this one. These are the armament. Like I said, male male cannons because of the cannons, and then you had females because of the machine guns. This is the competition for the FT. That's a joke. There's not really much competition. This is where I get into the fact that legally the FT shouldn't exist because these other companies were building, such as the Saint Chamond and the Schneider. The FT Renault, he he embezzled money to build, not money, resources to build the FT. Resources that were meant to build the Saint Chamond and the Schneider went to the FT. And it's a good thing that he did that because the Schneider is a worse looking Mark 1, and it was pretty bad. It had the same issues as the British Mark 1. It's yeah, the Schneider's basically a French Mark 1. And the Saint Chamond don't even get the Saint Chamond was so massive, but it was so awful. It had its automotive performance was awful. It nosedived constantly, and the cannon just exacerbated problems. And the Char2C technically didn't was not really a thing when the FT was around, or in prominent service. That's the joke behind the image in the background, the land battleship. Um, yeah, that was FT's competition. Not really much to and the French government, because okay, here's the thing: around this time, even into the Second World War, if you had command over an army as a general, and you had four other generals in French military command, you basically had four armies that fought for the French government. That's not a joke. Not entirely, anyways. If one French general wanted to, he could supply his entire French troop with American equipment if he ever so wanted to, and he could do it. But there was some standardization. You had to keep a certain uniform and certain this and that, which could have been bypassed with symbols and stuff. But they're also very patriotic because that's a good thing. You want to be patriotic for your country. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Tanks were different. Each general wanted similar designs or certain designs done for their tanks, but they all kind of favored heavy tanks because they're of that dumb notion that more armor makes tank better. Which, yeah, you can block an extra shot, but the result of that is stuff like the R35, where the R35 and whatnot. And the S35 was a good vehicle, but the R35s and whatnot, the two-man tanks that were very small and meant to be very fast, but then you add on a bunch of armor to a vehicle driven by a 40 horsepower engine, you run into the issue where, great, you've added a bunch of extra armor to your vehicle, and it still can't block the same shot that would have killed it before. That's the R35 and the H39 to an extent. Actually, the S35 was a good medium balance, but we'll do a video on that separately later. So, this is really the competition for the FT. Not much. Moving on, we have the countries that enjoyed the FT. The French, of course, the Soviets, the Americans, the Hungarians, the Polish, the Vichy French, the Germans, and the Japanese. Because this thing was a massive exporter. Because after the war, everyone wanted one because it was a very good vehicle. Like I said, you had the problems of the Western Front during the First World War. This tank provided an all-around solution to pretty much most, if not all, of the issues. Also, I love how we had to censor the funny German symbol, but yet but we're allowed to put the Vichy French flag, even though that flag is just a puppet flag for a puppet government of the funny German people. Thanks, YouTube. Anyways, yeah, everyone wanted one of these vehicles. There was a famous export tank known as the Vickers 6 ton that was developed by the British that everyone loved except for the British because it was a good all around medium tank. It was like an FT after the FT because it was well rounded, it functioned very well, and was very balanced and versatile. Though the Vickers 6 ton doesn't have much of a combat legacy as the FT because kind of does, most notably with the Soviet T-26, which is built off not an FT, a Vickers 6 ton, by the way, but rather the fact that the Vickers 6 ton just was built during the interwar period. And by the time the Vickers 6 ton came out, or really saw combat, it was severely outdated. Right? It's how military doctrine can change in 4 years, or just in a couple years, and make something that was great at one point almost entirely obsolete. Think of it like a TBD-1 Devastator for the American Naval Air Force. The Devastator was a great plane that was built for a completely different military standard. By the time it saw service, it wasn't great, but I'd argue that the TBD was actually a decent plane. It wasn't I wouldn't say it's the best torpedo bomber. However, the TBD Devastator really was a bad plane, mainly because its torpedo was so bad. But look up a video, a video about the TBD Devastator if you want to get more in depth with that specifically, because we're not on that topic yet. So either way, the point of this is that the tank was very widespread. Now it had a couple variants. Uh, not not too many because the vehicle is relatively small. Even the attempts to put a short 75 millimeter howitzer in the hull and the turret, that's what the upper middle and bottom right images are. They didn't go so well. And then also you had a command vehicle at the top right and the left bottom middle. The both left images and the bottom middle image are just various forms of mobile artillery. In fact, the bottom left two images are the same vehicle. And that's to make a point, which I'll get to in a minute. Overall, the FT service in the First World War, great. Loved by many countries, many tankers, even during a time when being a tanker was not too glamorous. Being a tanker during the First World War, it's like in Warhammer 40k when a dreadnought, if you don't, I'm making a lot of references here. It's essentially, when you enter a tank during the First World War, you became part of the tank. Like, you melded yourself into the machine almost. And you lived and died by the machine. Far different from what we'd see in the Second World War, where crew lives started, actually mattering. So on and so forth. But overall, the FT was one of the best tanks, the better tanks you could be in during the Second World War. I mean, the First World War, excuse me. The experience between the wars was so different. Absolutely. The tanks mainly saw service as reserve guard vehicles guarding cities being used by police forces and the Vichy French in North Africa. That's really it, to be honest with you. The reason why it didn't see much service is because, well, it's just so small. There's not much you can do to improve it, and this is because as technology progressed, the rate in which we made better French tank designs just improved as well. Because as technology progresses, the technology we use to develop the technology As technology progresses, the technology we use to develop the technology, as just stated, also progresses and increases and becomes more sophisticated. This is why we've gone through all of human history, the thousands of years we've been on the earth. And yet, only in the past couple hundred have, in comparison to all of human history, the past couple thousand, only since the, even since the, I'd say the 1900s to now, could be considered modern. Because over, only in the previous couple hundred years. Because as once technology starts to progress, then it becomes, it's a multiplying factor. And that's what I'm trying to get at. The FT was just simply outpaced, though a very good vehicle to the end. Because of what it left behind. That was its legacy. It was phased out of service in 1949 by other countries. Now, of course, you'll see images of them being used in Iraq as machine gun nests in the 80s, but it was pretty much phased out of serious military service in 1949 by partisan units and so on and so forth. This makes it one of the longest serving First World War vehicles. It's much like the Sherman of the First World War, where it saw service for a good number of years, much longer than it really needed to, but it did anyways. What it left behind was a legacy that would, and a groundbreaking design. What Renault created would see service and would be a doctrinal foundation to this day. If you look at the bottom left image, that is the Leclerc. Many MBTs follow this design, from the FT to the divided classes era to the universal tank era to the early MBT era to the modern MBT era. This tank, the Renault FT17, laid the groundwork. And this vehicle walked. See, this vehicle here walked so that the Leclerc could run. Not just the Leclerc. Every tank since then that had this format of crew in the front, automotive equipment in the back, the FT walked so that these vehicles could run. I thank you for watching the video. I wish to have had more people with me, but I just simply needed to make this video. I couldn't wait any longer, and I couldn't just post another music video. One thing I've been discussing with my subordinates is to make this transition, this kind of content, into live streaming. So while we're talking, we can answer your questions. If you have questions, if you have comments or discussion ideas, please leave them in the comment section below. One thing I'd like to point out is that in order to get transition to live content, we would need to say get more subscribers. Like I've wanted to avoid saying be sure to like and subscribe, guys. It's like, what's up, everybody? Be sure to, before we begin, let's hit that like and subscribe button. I want to avoid that because I don't want to beg for your subscriptions. But no, seriously, if you do want to see us transition to live form content so we can be more interactive, because we want that. We want to be more interactive with the viewers that watch this channel. So like, share, subscribe. Overall, though, thank you for watching. Hopefully this kind of content is to your liking. Also, be hyped, because I am too, because we're having a new kind of one of our bigger projects is coming out soon. I wouldn't say soon, but is in the works to come out. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been brief number 4 of the Think Bunker, the Renault FT17. Now that the brief is over, get back to work. Time is money and I'm broke.